At the sacred banks of the Nile, where the morning mist rises like prayers to the gods, a poor woman named Khaemwaset knelt to fill her clay vessel. The water reflected her weathered hands and the worry lines that poverty had etched across her young face. She had come here every dawn for 5 years, invisible to the wealthy merchants and nobles who passed by in their gilded barges. But today someone was watching. From the shadows of a towering date palm stepped Amenhotep, the Pharaoh's most feared guard. His bronze skin gleamed like polished copper, and his dark eyes hid secrets that could topple kingdoms. Known throughout Memphis for his ruthless efficiency and deadly silence, he had never spoken to a commoner, never acknowledged their existence. Yet as Khaemwaset rose to leave, he stepped forward and whispered words that would change both their fates forever. But what could a palace guard possibly want with a woman who had nothing to offer? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sun climbed higher over Memphis, casting long shadows across the sprawling city that stretched along the fertile banks of the great river. In the distance, the limestone pyramids of Giza pierced the desert sky like ancient prayers carved in stone. The air thrummed with the sounds of a civilization at its peak, merchants calling their wares, children laughing in narrow alleys, and the rhythmic chanting of priests conducting morning rituals in countless temples. Khaemwaset hurried through the maze of mud brick houses that comprised the poor quarter, her clay vessel heavy with precious water. Each step sent small clouds of dust into the morning air, and she pulled her worn linen shawl closer to her face against the grit. The encounter at the river had left her hands trembling, though whether from fear or something else entirely, she couldn't say. Her home sat squeezed between a potter's workshop and a grain seller's storehouse, its walls cracked and patched with whatever materials could be found. The single room served as kitchen, sleeping quarters, and workshop where she wove reed baskets to sell in the market. It wasn't much, but it sheltered her and her mother from the harsh desert winds and provided a place to call their own. "Mother, I've brought water," she called softly as she pushed aside the threadbare curtain that served as a door. Nefertari lay on a woven mat in the corner, her once beautiful face gaunt with illness. At 42, she looked decades older, her dark eyes sunken but still alert with the intelligence that had once caught a young nobleman's attention. The chronic fever that had plagued her for 2 years showed no signs of abating despite Khaemwaset's efforts to afford proper medicine. "You were gone longer than usual," Nefertari observed, accepting the cup of cool water her daughter offered. "The sun is already climbing toward its noon throne." Khaemwaset hesitated, unsure how to explain what had happened at the river. Her mother possessed an uncanny ability to read people's faces, a skill that had served her well in her younger days when she moved in more refined circles. "There was someone at the water's edge," she said carefully. "A man from the palace, I think." Nefertari's grip tightened on the cup. "What did he want?" "I'm not certain." "He spoke strangely about the gods favoring me. His eyes were different from other men's, like he could see things hidden from ordinary sight." The older woman set down her cup with shaking hands and studied her daughter's face intently. After a long moment, she spoke in a voice heavy with memories long buried. "Khaemwaset, there are things about our family that I've never told you, things I hoped would remain in the past where they belong." Meanwhile, across the city in the magnificent palace complex that dominated Memphis, like a golden jewel, Amenhotep stood in his private quarters, staring at a golden ankh pendant that hung from a leather cord around his neck. The symbol of life had been given to him by Pharaoh Ramesses himself, after Amenhotep had saved the ruler's life from an assassin's blade 3 years prior. The pendant caught the light streaming through the narrow window, casting dancing reflections on the stone walls. Like all the guards' quarters, his room was spartanly furnished, a simple bed, a wooden chest for his belongings, and a small shrine to Horus where he offered daily prayers. Yet the golden ankh marked him as different from his fellow guards, a man trusted with the pharaoh's most sensitive missions. He had served in the palace guard for 15 years, rising through the ranks, not through noble birth but through unwavering loyalty and deadly skill with both sword and strategy. His reputation for silence was legendary. It was said that Amenhotep could move through the palace corridors like a ghost, appearing at his master's side without sound or warning. The other guards respected him, the servants feared him, and the nobles treated him with the careful courtesy reserved for those who might carry their secrets to the pharaoh's ear. But today, that legendary composure had been shattered by a poor woman drawing water from the sacred river. The encounter had violated every principle of his service. Palace guards did not speak to commoners. They did not reveal themselves unnecessarily. They certainly did not approach women of questionable background with cryptic pronouncements about divine favor. Yet something about Khaemwaset had compelled him to break his silence. Perhaps it was the grace with which she moved despite her worn clothing, or the intelligence that flickered in her dark eyes. Perhaps it was the way she had looked at him without the usual mixture of fear and calculation he saw in most faces. Or perhaps, and this thought disturbed him most, it was the strange recognition that had passed between them, as if their meeting had been ordained by forces beyond mortal understanding. A sharp knock on his door interrupted his brooding. "Enter," he called, quickly tucking the pendant beneath his leather tunic. Captain Horemheb stepped into the room, his weathered face grave with the weight of important news. As commander of the palace guard, Horemheb had trained Amenhotep from his earliest days of service, molding a street orphan into one of the most trusted protectors in the kingdom. "The high priest Khenti requests your presence in the Temple of Thoth," Horemheb said. "He claims to have received an urgent message from the gods regarding palace security." Amenhotep felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air flowing through his window. The Temple of Thoth stood at the heart of the palace complex, its massive columns carved with hieroglyphs that seemed to writhe in the flickering torchlight. Amenhotep's sandaled feet made no sound on the polished stone floor as he approached the inner sanctuary, where High Priest Khenti waited with ceremonial solemnity. The priest was a man of indeterminate age, his shaved head gleaming with sacred oils, and his white linen robes pristine despite the morning heat. In his hands he held a papyrus scroll, sealed with red wax bearing the mark of the god Thoth himself, a sign that made even hardened warriors pause with reverence. "Amenhotep, faithful guardian of the divine Pharaoh," Khenti intoned, his voice echoing in the vaulted chamber. "The gods have spoken through the sacred abyss. A prophecy has been revealed that concerns the very stability of our kingdom." The guard captain felt his pulse quicken, though his expression remained impassive. In 15 years of palace service, he had learned to trust the priest's insights, even when they defied logical explanation. Khenti broke the wax seal with deliberate ceremony and unrolled the papyrus. The hieroglyphs seemed to glow in the temple's sacred light. As he read, "In the time of the rising flood, when Ra's chariot climbs highest, the gods shall choose a vessel from among the humble. She who draws life from the sacred river shall carry within her the seeds of dynasty restored. The guardian who speaks truth to the chosen shall find his destiny bound to hers for all eternity." Amenhotep felt the blood drain from his face. The coincidence was impossible to ignore. Yesterday's encounter at the Nile, his inexplicable compulsion to speak to a commoner woman, the strange recognition that had passed between them. "High priest," he said carefully, "what interpretation do the sacred scribes place upon these words?" Khenti's dark eyes studied him with unsettling intensity. "The gods rarely speak in riddles without purpose, my son. Tell me, have you encountered anyone recently who might fit this description? Someone who draws water from the sacred Nile." Before Amenhotep could respond, the sound of running footsteps echoed through the temple corridors. A young priest burst into the sanctuary, his usually composed demeanor shattered by urgency. "Forgive the intrusion, High Priest, but Captain Horemheb requests immediate assistance. Palace guards have been into the poor quarter on urgent business. Meanwhile, in the cramped confines of her humble dwelling, Khaemwaset knelt beside her mother's mat, her world tilting on its axis as long-held secrets spilled forth like water from a broken jar. "Your father was not the simple reed cutter I told you he was," Nefertari whispered, her fever-bright eyes fixed on her daughter's face. "He was Prince Amenhotep, second son of Pharaoh Seti, brother to the current ruler. I was his secret wife, married in a ceremony witnessed only by the gods." Khaemwaset's hands trembled as she absorbed this revelation. "But mother, that would make me. Royal blood flows in your veins, my daughter. When your father died in battle against the Nubians, I fled the palace to protect you from those who would see any potential rival to the throne eliminated. I chose poverty over palace intrigue, obscurity over the constant threat of assassination." The sound of heavy footsteps outside their dwelling made both women freeze. Through the thin walls came the unmistakable rhythm of marching soldiers, their bronze spear tips glinting in the morning sun. "Open in the name of Pharaoh Ramesses," commanded a voice that brooked no argument. Nefertari struggled to sit upright, her frail hands gripping her daughter's arm with surprising strength. "They've found us," she breathed. "After all these years, someone has discovered the truth." The curtain was swept aside with military efficiency, and 3 palace guards filled the doorway. Their leader, a scarred veteran named Seneb, surveyed the modest room with professional thoroughness before his gaze settled on Khaemwaset. "You will come with us," he announced. "High Priest Khenti requires your immediate presence at the temple." "On what authority?" Khaemwaset demanded, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. "We have committed no crime." Seneb held up an official papyrus, bearing multiple seals. "By order of the High Council of Priests, you are summoned for divine testing. Resistance will be met with force." Nefertari attempted to rise from her mat, but her weakened legs would not support her weight. "Please," she pleaded with the guards, "my daughter knows nothing of palace politics. She is innocent of any wrongdoing." "Innocence and guilt are for the gods to determine," Seneb replied, though his tone carried a hint of sympathy. "The testing will reveal all truths." Khaemwaset looked around their simple home, the reed baskets she had woven, the humble cooking pots, the small shrine to Isis where she had prayed for her mother's recovery. Everything that had defined her existence for 23 years suddenly felt like a child's game, about to be swept away by forces beyond her comprehension. "What kind of testing?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer would change everything. Seneb glanced at his fellow guards before responding, "The sacred mirror of truth. If royal blood truly flows in your veins, the gods will confirm it. If not," he left the implications unspoken. As the guards escorted her from the only home she had ever had, Khaemwaset caught sight of a familiar figure in the distance. Amenhotep stood at the edge of the poor quarter, his expression unreadable, but his presence somehow reassuring. Their eyes met across the dusty street, and she saw something in his gaze that steadied her racing heart. Whatever lay ahead in the palace halls, she would not face it entirely alone. The inner sanctum of the Temple of Thoth had been transformed into a chamber of divine judgment. Braziers burned with sacred incense that filled the air with smoke, carrying the prayers of generations, while carved statues of ancient gods watched with obsidian eyes from shadowed alcoves. At the chamber's heart stood a pedestal holding an artifact that made even the bravest warriors whisper in reverence: the silver mirror of truth. Khaemwaset stood before the assembled priests, her simple linen dress a stark contrast to their elaborate ceremonial robes. The mirror's polished surface reflected not just physical forms, but, according to legend, the very essence of souls. Those who looked into it could not lie, could not hide, could not pretend to be anything other than what the gods had made them. High Priest Khenti raised his hands in ritual gesture, his voice resonating through the sacred space. "Great Thoth, master of wisdom and keeper of divine records, reveal to us the truth of this woman's blood." Let the mirror show what mortal eyes cannot see. Amenhotep stood at attention near the chamber's entrance, officially present as palace security, but personally invested in an outcome he dared not fully contemplate. His hand unconsciously touched the golden ankh beneath his tunic as he watched Khaemwaset approach the mirror with dignity that belied her humble origins. "Place your hands upon the sacred surface," Khenti instructed, "and speak your true name before the gods." Khaemwaset's reflection wavered in the silver surface as she pressed her palms against the cool metal. For a moment nothing happened. Then, as if responding to some divine command, the mirror began to glow with soft, ethereal light. "I am Khaemwaset, daughter of Nefertari," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her limbs. The light intensified, and suddenly the mirror's surface rippled like disturbed water. Images began to form, not reflections of the present, but visions of the past. The assembled priests gasped as scenes unfolded before their eyes. A secret wedding ceremony conducted by moonlight, a young woman fleeing the palace in terror, a prince's funeral attended by mourners who whispered of mysterious circumstances. "By the sacred bark of Ra," breathed one of the junior priests, "the bloodline is true. She carries the mark of the pharaohs." But the mirror was not finished. New images emerged, clearer now, showing Khaemwaset not as she was, but as she could become. Dressed in royal regalia, standing beside a throne, her eyes holding wisdom that came only through trials, survived, and power earned rather than inherited. Khenti's expression shifted from scholarly curiosity to something approaching awe. "The gods have confirmed what the prophecy foretold. You are indeed of royal blood, granddaughter of Pharaoh Sati, niece to our current divine ruler." Khaemwaset stared at her transformed reflection, seeing a version of herself she had never imagined possible. The woman in the mirror wore a golden diadem set with lapis lazuli, and her eyes held the steady gaze of one born to command. "What does this mean for me?" she asked, though her question was directed as much to the mirror as to the priests surrounding her. "It means your life as a simple basket weaver has ended," Khenti replied. "You will be educated in the ways of court, taught to read and write in both hieroglyphic and hieratic scripts, schooled in the arts of diplomacy and statecraft. Your true heritage demands nothing less." From his position near the entrance, Amenhotep watched the transformation with mixed emotions. The prophecy had spoken of his destiny being bound to hers, but what role could a common god play in the life of a recognized princess? As if reading his thoughts, the high priest turned toward him. Amenhotep of the Silent Watch stepped forward. The guard captain approached with measured steps, his warrior's instincts alert for any sign of threat or deception. The mirror still glowed with divine light, and he could feel its power like heat from a forge. "Place your hand upon the mirror's edge," Khenti commanded. "Let the gods reveal your part in this divine plan." The moment Amenhotep's fingers touched the silver surface, the mirror's glow intensified dramatically. New visions formed, images of him standing guard not over a pharaoh's palace, but over a woman whose very presence commanded respect. Scenes of battle where he fought not for glory or gold, but for love and honor. A future where his loyalty would be tested in ways that would forge his soul like bronze in fire. Guardian and protected, Khenti interpreted, bound by divine will and mortal choice. "The gods have appointed you her shield and sword, Amenhotep. Your destiny is indeed linked to hers." Khaemwaset removed her hands from the mirror and turned to face the man who had first spoken to her at the river's edge. In his dark eyes she saw the same recognition that had passed between them before, but now it carried deeper meaning. "I don't understand any of this," she said quietly, speaking to him rather than the assembled priests. "Yesterday I was nobody. Today I'm told I'm a princess. What am I supposed to do with such knowledge?" Amenhotep stepped closer, forgetting protocol in the face of her obvious distress. "What any person does when faced with destiny," he replied. "Take one step at a time, and trust that the path will become clearer as you walk it. The mirror's glow began to fade, but its revelations had set events in motion that would reshape not just two lives, but the future of the kingdom itself. The royal apartments assigned to Khaemwaset bore little resemblance to the humble dwelling she had shared with her mother. Walls painted with scenes of lotus blossoms and soaring ibis. Birds surrounded furniture inlaid with precious metals and ivory. Windows overlooked gardens where peacocks strutted among flowering trees, and servants appeared at her slightest gesture with food, clothing, or whatever comfort she might require. Yet despite the luxury, she felt like a captive bird in a golden cage. "You must hold the reed pen differently," instructed scribe master Anku, his patience wearing thin after 3 hours of writing lessons. "The hieroglyphs require precision. A misplaced stroke can change life to death or blessing to curse." Khaemwaset adjusted her grip on the carved reed, her fingers cramped from the unfamiliar motion. The papyrus before her bore rows of practice symbols, some recognizable, others mysterious combinations that supposedly conveyed complex thought. In her former life, communication had been simple: spoken words, hand gestures, expressions that needed no translation. "Perhaps we should continue tomorrow," she suggested, setting down the pen with relief. "My mind feels as muddled as the Nile during flood season." Anku gathered his materials with the efficiency of long practice. "Princess, your royal uncle expects rapid progress in your education. The court session next week will require you to understand basic diplomatic correspondence." After the scribe departed, Khaemwaset walked to her window and gazed down at the palace courtyard where guards conducted their evening drills. Among them moved a familiar figure, and she found herself watching Amenhotep as he supervised sword practice with the younger soldiers. Even at a distance, his movements held the fluid grace of a born warrior. Soft knock interrupted her observation. "Enter," she called, expecting another servant with the evening meal. Instead, Amenhotep stepped into the room carrying something wrapped in silk cloth. His presence filled the space with an energy that made her pulse quicken, though she couldn't entirely explain why. "I thought you might appreciate something from beyond these walls," he said, unwrapping a carved ivory comb decorated with delicate lotus patterns. "I noticed your hair were difficult to manage without proper tools." The gift was beautiful, but practical, exactly the kind of thoughtful gesture that revealed character beneath a warrior's stern exterior. As she accepted it, their fingers brushed, sending warmth up her arm that had nothing to do with the evening heat. "This is exquisite," she murmured, running her thumb over the intricate carving. "But surely a palace guard's wages cannot afford such luxury." "I have few needs and no family to support," he replied simply. "My earnings accumulate like sand in the desert." She moved to a polished bronze mirror and began working the comb through her long black hair, unused to having such fine implements. In the reflection, she could see Amenhotep watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Tell me about your life before this," she said, needing to fill the charged silence between them. "How does a man become the Pharaoh's most trusted guard?" Amenhotep settled into a chair near the window, his usual rigid posture relaxing slightly. "I was born in the streets of Memphis, son of a woman who died bringing me into this world. Raised by an old soldier who taught me that strength without discipline is mere brutality." "And your family name?" "I have none. Palace guards who prove themselves worthy are granted names by the pharaoh himself. Amenhotep means piece of Amun, ironic for one whose life is spent in preparation for war." Khaemwaset turned from the mirror, comb still in hand. "Yet yesterday at the river you spoke of destiny. Do you truly believe the gods have planned our meeting?" "I believe," he said carefully, "that some encounters change us in ways we cannot predict or control. Whether divine will or mortal chance creates such moments matters less than what we do with them." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a palace page bearing urgent summons. "Captain Amenhotep, your presence is required in the security briefing chamber. Princess, Lady Amenhotep requests your attendance at evening court." As they prepared to separate for their respective duties, Amenhotep paused at the door. "Princess, a word of caution. Not everyone in the palace welcomes your presence. Not everyone in the palace welcomes your presence. Not at your royal blood as a threat to existing power structures. What kind of threats should I expect? The subtle kind, he replied grimly. Poisoned words disguised as friendly advice, alliances offered that come with hidden prices, invitations to gatherings where reputations are destroyed with surgical precision. Later that evening, Khaemwaset discovered the truth of his warnings. Lady Hentmire, wife of the High Treasurer, led her through the palace's social labyrinth with the skill of experienced hunter. Of course, we're all delighted by your return to court, Hentmire said, her smile sharp as a bronze blade, though some wonder how quickly one can truly adapt from such humble circumstances. The other court ladies tittered behind painted fans, their eyes glittering with malicious amusement. Khaemwaset felt heat rise in her cheeks, but forced herself to respond with dignity. Adaptation requires wisdom, which can be found in any walk of life, she replied. I've learned much from both poverty and privilege. Indeed, murmured Lady Anka, daughter of a powerful noble family. Though one hopes your education included proper deportment, court life requires such delicate understanding of protocol. The evening continued in similar fashion, each comment carefully crafted to undermine her confidence, while maintaining the veneer of respectful welcome. By the time she returned to her chambers, Khaemwaset felt emotionally battered. Despite the absence of direct confrontation, she found Amenhotep waiting in the corridor outside her door, his expression dark with concern. The briefing ended early, he explained. I wanted to ensure your first court gathering proceeded smoothly. Smoothly as a blade between the ribs, she replied, exhaustion evident in her voice. They smile with their mouths, while their eyes calculate ways to destroy me. He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of leather and sword oil that clung to him. Court politics are a battlefield where words replace weapons. You'll learn to navigate them, and if I prove too naive for their sophisticated cruelties. For answer, he placed his hand gently on her shoulder. Then you'll have allies who understand that true nobility comes from character, not bloodline. The ivory comb suits you, he added quietly, noting how she still wore it in her hair. As he turned to leave, she called his name, Amenhotep. Thank you for the gift, for the warning. She struggled to find words for the sense of protection his presence provided. For understanding, he finished, and she knew he felt it too, the connection that grew stronger with each encounter, defying every rule of protocol and social station. The attack came in the darkest hour before dawn, when even the palace guards dozed at their posts, and the corridors lay shrouded in shadows, deeper than tomb chambers. Khaemwaset had been restless, tossing on her bed of fine linen while dreams of her mother's fevered warnings chased sleep away. The soft whisper of sandaled feet in the corridor outside her chamber registered as nothing more than servant activity until the footsteps paused directly outside her door. The bronze latch lifted with barely a sound, and 3 figures slipped into her room like wraiths born from darkness itself. The leader carried an obsidian dagger that gleamed with deadly purpose in the faint starlight filtering through her window. Its black blade had been crafted by master weaponsmiths, sharp enough to part silk scarves and deadly enough to silence inconvenient voices forever. Khaemwaset's eyes snapped open as instinct screamed danger. She rolled sideways just as the obsidian blade descended, striking the mattress where her throat had been moments before. Goose feathers exploded into the air like snow, and she scrambled toward the window, desperate to raise an alarm. "Seize her," hissed the assassin leader, his face hidden behind a cloth mask. "Make it swift and silent." But Khaemwaset had not survived years of poverty without learning to fight for every advantage. She grabbed a heavy bronze mirror from her dressing table and hurled it at the nearest attacker, the metal catching him across the temple with a satisfying crack. He staggered, giving her precious seconds to reach the window. "Help!" she screamed into the night air. "Guard!" In the royal quarters, the obsidian dagger whistled past her ear, embedding itself in the wooden window frame with a solid thunk. The assassin cursed and drew a second blade from his belt, advancing with the patient stride of a professional killer. Doors burst open throughout the corridor as her cries echoed off stone walls. Heavy footsteps pounded toward her chamber, and she heard Amenhotep's voice bellowing orders above the chaos. The assassins realized their mission had failed. With practiced efficiency, they abandoned their attempt and melted back into the shadows, disappearing through a hidden passage behind a tapestry that Khaemwaset hadn't even known existed. Amenhotep arrived first, sword drawn and eyes blazing with protective fury. He took in the scene at a glance: scattered feathers, overturned furniture, and the obsidian dagger still quivering in the window frame. "Are you injured?" he demanded, his hands moving over her arms and shoulders with professional thoroughness, checking for wounds. "No, but they would have killed me if I hadn't awakened," she gasped, her voice shaking with delayed reaction. "The blade was meant for my throat." Captain Horemheb arrived with 6 additional guards, their bronze spear tips glinting in the torchlight, now flooding the corridor. The older officer's weathered face was grim as he surveyed the attempted murder scene. "Secure the princess," he ordered. "Full guard rotation until further notice. And find me that hidden passage. I want to know how assassins penetrated the royal quarters." Nebamun appeared with his physician's satchel, summoned by the commotion. His gentle hands examined Khaemwaset for injuries, while his sharp mind catalogued the evidence of professional assassination. "Obsidian blade," he observed, carefully extracting the dagger from the window frame. "Expensive, precisely balanced, and completely untraceable. Whoever ordered this attack has significant resources." Amenhotep accepted the weapon, turning it over in his hands with the expertise of a man who understood death in all its forms. "The craftsmanship is exceptional. This came from the royal armory, or someone with access to palace weaponsmiths." "Meaning the threat comes from within," Horemheb concluded grimly. Over the following days, the investigation revealed disturbing truths about the palace's hidden currents. The secret passage connected to a network of tunnels used by servants, creating countless opportunities for clandestine movement. More troubling, the assassination attempt had been carefully timed to coincide with a guard rotation change, suggesting intimate knowledge of security protocols. 3 separate court factions had reason to want you dead. Amenhotep reported during a private meeting in her chambers, now heavily guarded. "Lady Amenhotep's family fears your claim might threaten their influence with the Pharaoh. Prince Khaemwaset the Younger sees you as competition for royal favor, and the High Priest's inner circle worries about prophetic implications they haven't shared with anyone." Khaemwaset fingered the ivory comb he had given her, finding comfort in its familiar weight. "So I have enemies I don't even know about for reasons I barely understand. Welcome to royal life," he replied with bitter humor. "Every smile hides calculation, every friendship comes with conditions, and every day survived is a small victory. How do you bear it, living constantly on guard, trusting no one completely?" Amenhotep was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the lamplight. "By remembering what's worth protecting," he said finally, "and by accepting that some risks are necessary for things that matter." The obsidian dagger now rested in a secure vault, but its message remained clear. Khaemwaset's presence at court had disrupted careful balances of power, and someone was willing to commit murder to restore them. The question was not whether another attempt would come, but when, and whether they would be prepared to face it. The discovery came during a routine search of the palace archives, hidden beneath centuries of accumulated dust and deliberate obscurity. High Priest Khenti had ordered a thorough investigation into Khaemwaset's lineage, seeking documentation to support her claim and silence any remaining doubts about her royal blood. What they found exceeded even his expectations. Nestled within a cedar box wrapped in protective linen lay an ancient crown jewel, a magnificent sapphire the size of a dove's egg, surrounded by intricate gold work depicting the unified crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt. The gemstone pulsed with inner fire, its deep blue surface containing flecks that seemed to move like captured starlight. The Eye of Horus, breathed Master Archivist Khaemwaset, his aged hands trembling as he lifted the jewel toward the torchlight. Lost for 3 dynasties, thought destroyed in the great fire that consumed the old palace. This belonged to Queen Nefertiti herself. Amenhotep stood guard while the scholars examined their find, but his attention was divided between security concerns and the growing certainty that events were moving beyond anyone's control. Each revelation seemed to draw Khaemwaset deeper into a web of ancient politics and divine mandate that left less room for personal choice. According to the accompanying scrolls, Khanti announced, this jewel was passed down through the maternal line of royal succession. Its presence confirms not just noble blood, but legitimate claim to the throne itself. Khaemwaset studied the sapphire with mixed emotions. Its beauty was undeniable, but she recognized the weight of symbolism it carried. What you're saying is that I'm not merely a distant relative with royal blood. I'm a direct heir. More than that, the high priest replied solemnly, should anything happen to Pharaoh Ramesses and his designated successor, your claim would supersede all others. This jewel is proof that the gods themselves have preserved your lineage for purposes yet to be revealed. The implications settled over the archive chamber like morning mist over the Nile. Political dynamics that had seemed complex before now revealed themselves as impossibly intricate, with her very existence threatening established successions and carefully negotiated power balances. Who else knows about this discovery, Amenhotep asked. His warrior's instincts immediately focused on threat assessment. Only those present in this room, Khanti assured him. But such secrets have a way of seeping through palace walls like water through limestone. We must assume others will learn of it soon. That evening, Khaemwaset found herself summoned to an unprecedented private audience with Princess Nefertari, sister to Pharaoh Ramesses and one of the most powerful women in the kingdom. The princess received her in a luxurious chamber overlooking the palace gardens, where lotus blossoms floated in reflecting pools that mirrored the evening star. So you are the lost princess, Nefertari said, her voice carrying the musical quality that had made her legendary throughout the known world. At 35, she possessed the timeless beauty of royal breeding, combined with intelligence sharp enough to cut bronze. The gods have interesting ways of returning what was thought lost forever. Your Highness, I never sought this destiny, Khaemwaset replied honestly. Until a week ago I was content with my simple life. Content perhaps, but not fulfilled. Nefertari rose gracefully and moved to the window, her silk robes rustling like whispered secrets. I've been watching you since your arrival. You carry yourself with natural dignity, and your eyes hold depths that speak of wisdom gained through hardship. What do you want of me, Prince? Nefertari turned back with a smile that held both warmth and calculation. To offer you guidance in navigating the treacherous currents of court life, and perhaps to suggest an alliance that could benefit us both. She gestured toward a low table where wine had been prepared in golden cups. My brother the Pharaoh is strong and healthy, but he has no male heirs. His designated successor is our cousin Amenhotep, a competent man but not particularly beloved by the people or the military. You're speaking of succession, Khaemwaset said carefully. Such conversations could be seen as treasonous, only if one's motivations are treasonous, Nefertari replied smoothly. I speak of the kingdom's stability and the god's will. Your sudden appearance, confirmed by prophecy and ancient jewels, cannot be mere coincidence. As they spoke, Khaemwaset maintained his vigil outside the chamber, but his enhanced hearing caught fragments of conversation that made his blood run cold. Palace politics were approaching a complexity that could tear the kingdom apart, and Khaemwaset was being drawn into the very center of the maelstrom. The Eye of Horus is not just a symbol, Nefertari continued. It's a key that unlocks doors to power that has been sealed for generations. The question is whether you'll use that key or allow others to use it for you. And your proposal, support when you need it, wisdom when you lack it, and protection when threats emerge from unexpected quarters. In return, you remember your friends when the time comes to make choices that affect the kingdom's future. Khaemwaset fingered the ivory comb in her hair, finding its familiar presence reassuring in the face of overwhelming political implications. I need time to consider such weighty matters. Of course, but remember that time is a luxury that circumstances may not allow us to enjoy indefinitely. Later that night, as Amenhotep escorted her back to her chambers, Khaemwaset struggled with the magnitude of what she had learned. The sapphire jewel had transformed her from an unexpected royal relative into a legitimate claimant to the throne itself. "Did you know," she asked quietly, "about the Eye of Horus and what it represents?" "I suspected the moment they found you had royal blood that the implications went deeper than anyone initially understood," he replied. "But I hoped I was wrong, because it complicates everything between us." He stopped walking and turned to face her in the torchlit corridor. "Because it means the woman I'm falling in love with is about to become the most dangerous person in the kingdom to care about." The map had been hidden beneath the false bottom of an ancient cedar chest in Princess Nefertari's private chambers, its papyrus surface yellowed with age, but still clearly depicting the labyrinthine network of passages that honeycombed the palace like an anthill. Amenhotep studied the intricate drawings by flickering candlelight, memorizing every twist and turn of the hidden routes that connected chambers, dungeons, and escape tunnels throughout the massive complex. These passages were built during the reign of Pharaoh Djoser, Nefertari explained in whispered tones. Each succeeding ruler added new sections, creating a maze that only the royal family and their most trusted advisors have ever fully understood. Khaemwaset traced one of the marked routes with her finger. "This tunnel leads directly from my chambers to the eastern wall. Why are you showing us this?" "Because," the princess replied gravely, "our spies have uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that goes far beyond simple court jealousy. The High Treasurer Amenhotep has been meeting secretly with Nubian ambassadors, and Prince Khaemwaset the Younger has been accumulating weapons in his private armory." The implications struck Amenhotep like physical blows. A coordinated uprising involving foreign powers would mean civil war, bloodshed on a scale that could destroy the kingdom. "How certain is this intelligence?" "Certain enough that I've already begun moving loyal servants and guards into strategic positions," Nefertari answered. The attack on Khaemwaset was not meant merely to eliminate a rival. It was intended to provoke a response that would justify more extreme measures. They were meeting in a chamber deep within the hidden passage system, accessible only through a concealed entrance behind a statue of Isis in the temple complex. The space had been carved from living rock and furnished with basic necessities, sleeping mats, water jugs, and supplies that suggested it had been used as a refuge many times throughout the palace's history. "What you're describing sounds like preparation for siege," Khaemwaset observed, her voice steady despite the gravity of their situation. "In essence, that's exactly what it is," Nefertari confirmed. "The palace has become a battleground where loyalty is more valuable than gold and trust is a luxury that can cost lives." Amenhotep continued studying the map, his military training automatically cataloging defensive positions and potential choke points. These passages could allow a small force to move undetected throughout the palace, but they could also serve as invasion routes if compromised. "Which is why I'm sharing this knowledge with you now," the princess said. "Events are moving too quickly for gradual preparation. Within days, possibly hours, you may need to use these routes to escape or to strike back at your enemies." A soft scraping sound from the passage entrance made all three freeze. Amenhotep's hand moved instinctively to his sword hilt, and he positioned himself between the women and the potential threat. But instead of enemies, a figure emerged from the shadows. Dr. Neberman, his physician's robes dusty from crawling through narrow tunnels. "Forgive the intrusion," he said quietly, "but I bring urgent news that could not wait for formal channels." The doctor's usually composed demeanor showed cracks of strain and exhaustion. "I've been treating several palace servants for a mysterious illness, fever, delirium, and in 2 cases death. The symptoms are consistent with a slow-acting poison, one that takes days to manifest but is invariably fatal." "Poison?" Khaemwaset felt her blood chill. "Are you certain?" "The evidence is unmistakable. Someone has been systematically poisoning the water supply to specific quarters of the palace, including the royal wing where your chambers are located." Nefertari's composure cracked slightly. How long before the poison reaches lethal concentration? Based on the progression I've observed, anyone drinking exclusively from the contaminated sources has perhaps 2 days before symptoms become irreversible. The hidden chamber fell silent, except for the distant sound of water dripping somewhere in the stone passages. Amenhotep felt the weight of command settling on his shoulders as he realized that protection now meant more than simply watching for assassins with daggers. "We need to evacuate immediately," he decided. "Princess, can these tunnels get us safely outside the palace wall?" Nefertari consulted the map again. "Yes, but leaving means abandoning any hope of stopping whatever the conspirators have planned. Once we're gone, they'll have free rein to eliminate remaining loyalists and consolidate power. And if we stay, we die slowly from poison while they pick off survivors one by one." Khaemwaset pointed out. Dr. Nebamon opened his physician's satchel and withdrew several clay vials. "I've prepared antidotes based on my analysis of the poison, but they're untested and I can't guarantee their effectiveness. We're operating on medical theory rather than proven treatment. The weight of impossible choices pressed down on them like stones from a collapsed pyramid. Every option carried enormous risks, and delay meant certain death, while action meant probable death, with at least some chance of success. There is another possibility," Amenhotep said slowly, an idea forming as he studied the map's complex network of passages. "Instead of running or hiding, we use their own tactics against them. These tunnels that allow them to move unseen can also be used to gather intelligence and strike back where they least expect it." Nefertari's eyes brightened with understanding. "Turn their advantage into ours." "Exactly, but it would require splitting up, moving in small groups, and coordinating attacks from multiple directions simultaneously." Khaemwaset looked between the faces surrounding her, a royal princess willing to risk everything for justice, a physician ready to gamble untested medicines against certain death, and a guard captain whose love had transformed duty into something far more dangerous. "Then we stop running," she decided. "If they want a war, we'll give them one they never expected." The ancient ceremony took place in the deepest chamber of the hidden passage network, where carved hieroglyphs from the earliest dynasties watched over rituals older than memory itself. Nebamon had discovered the chamber while following the map's most obscure markings, finding a space that had served as a sanctuary for royal secrets for over 1,000 years. By flickering torchlight, High Priest Khamti performed the sacred rites with modifications necessitated by their desperate circumstances. Instead of the great temple with its towering columns and elaborate altar, they made do with a simple stone slab carved with symbols of eternal binding. The wedding bracelet he produced from beneath his robes was a masterwork of ancient goldsmithing, intertwined serpents representing the protective gods, Wadjat and Nekbat, their eyes set with emeralds that caught the flame light like captured souls. "In the presence of the hidden gods who guard the throne of pharaohs," Khamti intoned, his voice echoing off stone walls that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, "I bind these souls in union that death itself cannot sever." Khamti felt the weight of destiny settling around her like a cloak. As Amenhotep took her hands in his warrior's calluses were rough against her palms, but his touch carried gentleness that spoke of the man beneath the soldier's exterior. Before gods and witnesses, Amenhotep spoke the ancient vows. "I pledge my sword, my heart, and my life to your protection. In prosperity and adversity, in triumph and defeat, I choose you above all earthly treasures." Her voice trembled slightly as she responded with words that had bound royal couples for centuries. "Before gods and witnesses, I pledge my wisdom, my heart, and my life to our shared destiny. In joy and sorrow, in power and exile, I choose you above all earthly honors." Princess Nefertari served as witness, her presence lending royal legitimacy to the ceremony despite their underground circumstances. As Khamti fastened the golden bracelet around Khaemwaset's wrist, the emerald eyes of the protective serpents seemed to pulse with inner life. "By the power invested in me by the gods themselves," the priest concluded, You are bound in marriage until Ra's bark sails no more across the heavens. What followed was not the elaborate celebration traditional to royal weddings, but something far more intimate and precious, stolen moments of tenderness in a world gone mad with conspiracy and violence. Amenhotep drew her close, and their first kiss as husband and wife carried all the passion and desperation of lovers who knew that tomorrow might bring separation or death. I never imagined, Khaemwaset whispered against his lips, that love could feel both like coming home and launching into the unknown at the same time. The unknown is easier to face when you're not facing it alone, he replied, his forehead resting against hers. Nebemon had prepared a small feast from supplies smuggled through the hidden passages, bread still warm from the palace ovens, wine from the royal cellars, and honey cakes that dissolved on the tongue like sweet promises of better days ahead. They shared the meal sitting on woven mats spread across the stone floor, their voices low but their laughter genuine despite the circumstances. To the bride and groom, Nefertari raised her cup in toast. May your love prove stronger than the schemes of your enemies. But even as they celebrated, the reality of their situation pressed in around them like the stone walls of their underground sanctuary. Above them, the palace settled into evening routines, while poisoned water slowly claimed more victims, and conspirators made final preparations for whatever coup they had planned. The bracelet will serve as more than decoration, Khamti explained, as the ceremony concluded. The gold is from Nubian mines, blessed by the gods, and the emeralds contain protective spells that have guarded royal bloodlines for generations. As long as you wear it, certain forms of harm cannot touch you. The priest's words proved prophetic sooner than any of them expected. As they prepared to separate and return to their various roles above ground, a commotion in the outer passages announced the arrival of unexpected visitors. Captain Horemheb appeared, supporting a wounded palace guard whose bronze armor showed fresh dents from recent combat. "Princess, we've discovered the poisoners," he reported grimly. 3 kitchen servants, all dead by their own hand rather than face questioning. Suicide rather than reveal their masters. Amenhotep observed, which means the conspiracy has reached the point where exposure would be catastrophic for someone with significant power. The wounded guard struggled to speak through pain and exhaustion. "Captain, there's more." Prince Khaemwaset, the younger, has summoned the palace guard for an emergency assembly at dawn. He claims to have evidence of treason within the royal household. The implications struck them all simultaneously. The prince was moving to seize control, using the chaos of the poisoning attacks as justification for extraordinary measures that would eliminate his rivals and consolidate power in his hands. They're accelerating their timeline, Nefertari realized. Whatever they have planned, it happens tomorrow. Amenhotep helped the wounded guard to a sitting position while Dr. Nebemon examined his injuries. The physician's skilled hands worked quickly, but his expression remained grim as he catalogued damage that spoke of fierce fighting. "Who attacked you?" Amenhotep asked. "Soldiers." The guard gasped. "Nubians, I think, but wearing Egyptian armor. They've infiltrated the palace in significant numbers." Khaemwaset touched the wedding bracelet on her wrist, feeling its weight as both protection and responsibility. Her wedding night had become a war council, and her marriage bed would be whatever hidden refuge they could find in the battle to come. "Then we fight," she decided, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "As husband and wife, as allies, as the last hope for legitimate rule." Amenhotep's eyes burned with fierce pride as he looked at the woman who had chosen to face impossible odds rather than flee to safety. "As you command, my queen." The lotus flower arrived with the dawn, delivered by a young servant girl whose innocent smile masked the deadly cargo she carried. Pink petals unfurled like delicate silk around a center that gleamed with unnatural moisture, and its fragrance carried an almost hypnotic sweetness that drew the breath deep into the lungs. "From an admirer who wishes you joy on this blessed morning," the girl recited, placing the flower in an alabaster vase beside Khaemwaset's breakfast tray, before disappearing as quickly as she had come. Khaemwaset studied the beautiful bloom with growing unease. Something about its perfection troubled her. The way its petals showed no sign of natural browning, how its stem remained rigid despite being cut from its roots. When she leaned closer to inhale its fragrance, the wedding bracelet on her wrist grew warm against her skin. The sensation was subtle at first, like standing too close to a brazier, but it intensified as she drew nearer to the flower. The emerald eyes of the protective serpents seemed to pulse with warning light, and she jerked back from the vase with sudden understanding. Amenhotep called, her voice sharp with urgency. He appeared instantly from his guard position outside her door, sword already half drawn at the alarm in her tone. "What's wrong?" "The flower. Someone sent it as a gift, but the bracelet warns of danger." He approached the vase with warrior's caution, and even from several feet away, both could see the unnatural sheen on the petals that spoke of applied poison. "Assassination by perfume," he murmured grimly. "Elegant, untraceable, and designed to appear like natural death from overwhelming beauty." Dr. Nebamorn arrived moments later, summoned by the commotion. His physician's eye immediately recognized the signs of sophisticated poisoning. Lotus nectar, mixed with extract of oleander. I would guess, possibly enhanced with other compounds to accelerate absorption through the lungs. "How long would it have taken?" Khaemwaset asked, horrified by how close she had come to breathing deeply of the deadly fragrance. "Minutes, perhaps less," the doctor replied. "You would have appeared to swoon from the flower's beauty, then fallen into a peaceful sleep from which you would never awaken." The servant girl was found dead in a storage chamber an hour later, a victim of the same poison that had coated the lotus petals. Her death eliminated the only witness who might have identified the flower's true sender, leaving behind only the terrible evidence of how thoroughly their enemies had penetrated even the most innocent-seeming palace routines. "Professional work," Captain Horemheb observed as he examined the girl's body. "Killed by her handlers to prevent interrogation. The flower was likely prepared by someone with extensive knowledge of poisons and their effect." Princess Nefertari joined them in the hidden chamber where they had begun conducting all sensitive meetings, her expression grave with new intelligence. "Our spies report that High Treasurer Amenhotep hosted a private dinner last night for several foreign dignitaries. The gathering broke up just before dawn, precisely when the poisoned flower was delivered. The web of conspiracy was revealing itself piece by piece, each new revelation showing greater depth and sophistication than they had initially imagined. This was not merely palace intrigue, motivated by jealousy or ambition, but a coordinated attack on the kingdom itself. "They're testing our defenses," Amenhotep realized. The earlier assassination attempt was crude by design, meant to make us focus on physical security. This poison attack was subtle, designed to make us underestimate their capabilities. Now they know we have supernatural protection of some kind. Khaemwaset touched the wedding bracelet that had saved her life, feeling its protective warmth pulse against her skin like a second heartbeat. "The bracelet warned me, but it couldn't save the servant girl. Their deaths are on my conscience." "No," Dr. Nebamorn corrected firmly. "Their deaths are on the conscience of whoever ordered them. You are the target, not the cause." High Priest Khamti appeared through the hidden entrance, his usually serene features troubled by disturbing news. "I have consulted the sacred scrolls regarding protective magic and poison," he announced. "The bracelet will guard against direct harm, but it cannot protect others who suffer because of their association with you." "Then we're endangering everyone who helps us," Khaemwaset said, her voice heavy with the weight of unintended consequences. "We're giving them the chance to choose," Amenhotep countered, "between helping preserve legitimate rule or allowing the kingdom to fall into the hands of murderers who poison children to eliminate inconvenient witnesses." Princess Nefertari unrolled fresh intelligence reports across the stone table, where they had celebrated a wedding that now seemed like it had occurred in another lifetime. "The situation is deteriorating rapidly. Prince Khaemwaset the Younger plans to address the full court this afternoon, claiming he has proof of foreign infiltration that threatens the pharaoh's life. which gives him justification for emergency powers, Horemheb concluded grimly, and the authority to eliminate anyone he deems a threat to royal security. Amenhotep added, "The poisoned lotus flower sat in its alabaster vase like a beautiful reminder of how death could disguise itself in the most innocent forms. Its petals had begun to brown at the edges now that its supernatural preservation had faded, revealing the corruption that had lurked beneath its perfect surface." "They've made a critical error," Khaemwaset said suddenly, studying the dying flower with new understanding. "By targeting me with poison, they've revealed that they know about the protective magic. That knowledge could only come from someone with access to the most sacred temple archives." The realization struck them all simultaneously. Their enemy was not merely someone with political ambition, but someone with intimate knowledge of ancient protective rituals and access to the deepest secrets of the priesthood. "The High Treasurer has a brother among the temple scribes," Nefertari remembered. "Someone with access to restricted scrolls and knowledge of old magic." The lotus flower's last petal fell as they watched, leaving behind only a bare stem in the alabaster vase, a perfect metaphor for how beautiful facades could conceal deadly intentions. The document had been sealed within a bronze cylinder and hidden beneath the altar of the most sacred shrine in the palace complex, a place so holy that only the pharaoh and his immediate family were permitted to enter. Princess Nefertari had discovered it during a desperate search for additional evidence to counter Prince Khaemwaset's accusations, following a cryptic reference in her late father's private journals. The royal birth certificate was written in the most formal hieroglyphic script, with each symbol painstakingly carved into finest papyrus and filled with gold ink that still gleamed despite decades of concealment. The seals at the bottom bore the marks of Pharaoh Seti himself, High Priest Amenhotep, and 3 witnesses whose names carried the weight of absolute credibility. Dr. Nebamon read the ancient text aloud, his voice trembling with the magnitude of the revelation. "In the 32nd year of his reign, Pharaoh Seti, beloved of Ra, acknowledges the birth of his daughter Khaemwaset, born to his beloved wife Princess Nefertari Nebetui in the sacred chambers of the palace. Let it be recorded that this child is born of royal blood and divine blessing, legitimate heir to the throne of the 2 lands." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of water dripping in the hidden passages. Each person in the chamber understood that they were witnessing a moment that would reshape the kingdom's entire future. "This makes you not just a princess," Princess Nefertari whispered to Khaemwaset, "but the pharaoh's legitimate daughter. Your claim to succession supersedes everyone's, including Prince Khaemwaset the Younger." Amenhotep felt the ground shift beneath his understanding of everything that had happened. The woman he had married was not merely noble-born, but the rightful heir to the most powerful throne in the known world. His protective instincts warred with the sudden realization of just how impossible their situation had become. "My mother never told me," Khaemwaset said, her voice hollow with shock. "All these years, she let me believe I was the daughter of a minor prince, a distant relative with no real claim to power." High Priest Khaemwaset studied the document with expert eyes, verifying each seal and marking with the thoroughness of long experience. "The seals are genuine, the writing authentic, and the signatures match temple records perfectly. There can be no doubt about its legitimacy, which explains why someone was willing to commit multiple murders to prevent its discovery," Captain Horemheb observed grimly. "With this document, you become the greatest threat to anyone hoping to seize power illegitimately." The implications cascaded through their understanding like stones, triggering an avalanche. Every conspiracy, every assassination attempt, every act of sabotage suddenly made perfect sense when viewed through the lens of preventing a legitimate heir from claiming her birthright. The current queen must have known, Princess Nefertari realized. Her children's claims to succession would be invalidated by your existence. She had every reason to ensure you remained lost in obscurity. Nebamon carefully rolled the precious document and placed it in a protective case crafted for such purposes. "This also explains the prophecy that brought you to the palace's attention." The gods were not merely favoring you, they were calling you home to claim what was rightfully yours. Amenhotep moved to the chamber's entrance, his warrior senses alert for any sign that their hiding place had been compromised. The weight of protecting not just his wife, but the kingdom's rightful ruler pressed down on him like a physical burden. "What happens now?" Khaemwaset asked. Though her tone suggested she already knew the answer would be far from simple. "Now you must choose," Khaemwaset replied solemnly. "You can present this document to the full court and claim your birthright, knowing that doing so will trigger civil war, or you can remain hidden, allowing others to seize power while the kingdom burns around us." "Some choice," she said with bitter humor. "Start a war or watch one happen anyway." Princess Nefertari approached her with the measured grace of someone accustomed to making impossible decisions. "There is a third option, though it carries enormous risks. We present the document privately to my brother the Pharaoh first, allowing him to acknowledge your legitimacy and designate you as his heir officially, assuming he's willing to overturn decades of succession planning and risk alienating the current queen and her supporters," Amenhotep pointed out. "And assuming he's still alive and free to make such decisions," Horemheb added darkly. "Our intelligence suggests that Prince Khaemwaset's emergency address this afternoon may include some very disturbing announcements about the pharaoh's health." The birth certificate lay between them, like a torch that could either light their way to victory or set the entire kingdom ablaze. Its gold ink caught the torchlight with the same fire that had once burned in Pharaoh Seti's eyes as he acknowledged his daughter's birth, never imagining that she would one day return from obscurity to reclaim her heritage. "I need to see my mother," Khaemwaset decided suddenly. "She's the only one who can explain why she kept this secret, what she feared would happen if the truth came out." "That's impossible," Dr. Neberman said gently. "The palace is under virtual siege, and your mother is too ill to be moved safely through the hidden passages." "Then I go to her," Khaemwaset replied with the quiet determination that was becoming her signature. "As her daughter, and as the rightful heir to the throne of Egypt." The royal birth certificate had transformed her from a woman seeking safety into a queen preparing to claim her crown, regardless of the cost. The commander's staff lay heavy in Amenhotep's hands, its bronze length inlaid with precious metals that caught the torchlight like captured lightning. Pharaoh Seti had carried this very staff during his greatest military campaigns, and it had passed to each successive commander of the royal guard, as both symbol and weapon. Captain Horemheb pressed it into Amenhotep's grip with ceremony that their desperate circumstances could not diminish. "The authority that comes with this staff has been earned through blood and loyalty," Horemheb said, his weathered face grave with the weight of tradition being passed to younger hands. "Every man who has carried it has faced impossible odds and emerged victorious through courage and wisdom." Around them in the hidden chamber, the last loyal members of the palace guard prepared for what might be their final battle. 23 warriors remained of the original 50 who had served faithfully for years, their bronze armor polished, despite the circumstances, their weapons sharp and ready for the fight ahead. "The prince's forces control the main palace," reported Sergeant Ketty, a scarred veteran whose tactical knowledge had saved countless lives over the years. "Foreign mercenaries occupy the throne room, the royal quarters, and the main armory. But they've made a crucial error. They believe we fled the palace entirely." Amenhotep studied the detailed intelligence his scouts had gathered throughout the morning. Prince Khaemwaset the Younger had moved with impressive speed, but his focus on securing obvious strategic points had left him vulnerable to attacks from directions he hadn't considered. "The hidden passages give us mobility they can't match," he observed, running his finger along the map Princess Nefertari had provided. "Small teams moving through concealed routes can strike multiple targets simultaneously, creating confusion and forcing them to divide their forces." Neberman had transformed a section of the chamber into a field medical station, his instruments laid out with precise care despite the primitive conditions. "I've prepared medicines for treating battle wounds, but our supplies are limited. Any engagement must be decisive. We cannot sustain prolonged fighting." Khaemwaset stood beside her husband, no longer the uncertain woman who had drawn water from the Nile less than 2 weeks ago. The royal birth certificate had awakened something in her that went beyond mere acknowledgement of bloodline, a sense of responsibility for the kingdom and its people that transformed fear into determination. "What of the Pharaoh?" she asked. "Have we confirmed his condition?" Princess Nefertari's expression darkened with troubling news. "Our spies report that my brother is alive but confined to his chambers under guard. Prince Khaemwaset claims he's protecting the Pharaoh from assassination attempts. But reliable witnesses say Ramesses has been drugged into a stupor that prevents him from issuing orders or making declarations." The implications struck everyone present. With the Pharaoh incapacitated, Prince Khaemwaset could act with apparent legitimacy while eliminating anyone who threatened his claim to power. High Priest Khaemti emerged from the shadows, where he had been tenting final blessings on weapons and armor. "The gods have spoken through the sacred abyss," he announced. "Victory will come to those who fight not for personal gain, but for the preservation of divine order." "Comforting words," muttered Sergeant Cutty, "but divine order doesn't stop enemy spears." "No," Amenhotep agreed, hefting the commander's staff with growing confidence, "but it gives us reason to ensure our spears strike true." The final assault plan took shape through careful consultation between military experience and intimate knowledge of palace layout. 3 teams would strike simultaneously, one to secure the royal quarters and free the Pharaoh, another to seize the main armory and prevent reinforcements from being armed, and a third to capture Prince Khaemwaset himself. "The throne room team faces the greatest danger," Amenhotep acknowledged. "Foreign mercenaries will fight to the death rather than face execution for treason. We need volunteers who understand they may not survive the assault." Every remaining guard stepped forward without hesitation, their loyalty proven through years of shared danger and mutual trust. The gesture moved Khaemwaset deeply, seeing men willing to die for principles that transcended personal survival. "I'm going with the throne room assault," she announced, surprising everyone, including her husband. "Absolutely not," Amenhotep said immediately. "The danger is something I must face," she interrupted with quiet steel in her voice. "I am the rightful heir. My presence legitimizes everything we do, and my absence makes us mere rebels fighting against established authority." Princess Nefertari nodded approvingly. "She's correct. The moment she appears before the court and presents her birth certificate, the entire dynamic changes from rebellion to restoration." Dr. Nebamin packed additional medical supplies, knowing that Khaemwaset's participation would increase casualties among those trying to protect her. "The wedding bracelet will provide some protection, but it cannot stop every form of harm. Then we ensure she faces as little harm as possible," Amenhotep decided, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Maximum force, minimum exposure. We strike fast, hard and completely." The commander's staff felt lighter in his hands now, as if accepting the responsibility it represented had somehow made its physical weight easier to bear. Around him, warriors who had served faithfully for years, prepared to risk everything for a woman they had known for mere days, trusting in her legitimacy and his leadership. "When do we move?" Sergeant Ketty asked, his scarred hands checking his weapons one final time. Amenhotep looked toward Khaemwaset, seeing in her eyes the same fierce determination that had once burned in the greatest pharaohs. "At sunset," he decided, "when the changing light will mask our movements and the prince's forces will be tired from a full day of vigilance." The staff of command pulsed warm in his grip, as if awakening to purpose after too long in storage. The shield of the First Dynasty had hung in the palace armory for over 800 years, its bronze surface bearing the dents and scratches of countless battles fought by Egypt's earliest pharaohs. Legend claimed it had been carried by Pharaoh Menes himself during the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, and its protective power had never failed those worthy enough to wield it. Sergeant Ketty strapped it to his arm with reverent care as the first assault team prepared to emerge from the hidden passages into what would certainly be a fight for their lives. Dawn painted the palace courtyard in shades of gold and crimson as Amenhotep's carefully coordinated attack began. The three teams moved with synchronized precision born of years fighting together, emerging from concealed entrances that Prince Khaemwaset's forces had never suspected existed. The armory team struck first, overwhelming surprised guards before they could raise an alarm. Bronze clashed against bronze in the pre-dawn silence, the sound echoing off stone walls like thunder in the desert. Sergeant Ketty's legendary shield deflected spear thrusts and sword strikes with supernatural resilience, its ancient bronze showing no new damage despite the ferocity of combat. "Secure those weapon racks," Ketty bellowed, his voice carrying the authority of decades spent commanding men in desperate situations. No foreign dog gets his hands on Egyptian steel. The mercenaries defending the armory fought with professional competence, but they lacked the passionate intensity that drove men defending their homeland. Within minutes, the loyal guards had secured enough weapons and armor to equip additional reinforcements, turning the tide of numerical disadvantage that had seemed insurmountable. Meanwhile, Princess Nefertari led the team assigned to free Pharaoh Ramesses from his guarded confinement. Her intimate knowledge of palace security protocols allowed them to approach the royal chambers through routes the mercenaries hadn't thought to guard. 2 sentries at the main door, 3 more in the antechamber, she whispered to Captain Horemheb, who had insisted on personally leading this crucial mission. "But the real danger lies in whatever drugs they've used to keep my brother compliant." Nebamun crept forward with his medical satchel, prepared to counteract whatever compounds had been used to maintain the pharaoh's docility. The antidotes he had prepared were theoretical at best, but they represented the only hope of restoring Egypt's rightful ruler to consciousness in time to legitimize their rebellion. The third team, led by Amenhotep himself and including Khaemwaset, despite his continued protests, approached the throne room where Prince Khaemwaset, the younger, held court, surrounded by his foreign allies. The ancient shield of the First Dynasty gleamed on Sergeant Ketty's arm as he took point, its legendary protection extending to those who fought beside its bearer. "Remember," Amenhotep whispered to his wife as they reached the final concealed entrance, "once we emerge, everything changes. You'll be fighting not just for your life, but for the legitimacy of your claim to rule." Khaemwaset touched the wedding bracelet on her wrist, feeling its protective warmth pulse against her skin. "I understand, but I also understand that some things are worth dying for." The throne room doors burst open simultaneously from 3 different directions as Amenhotep's plan reached its culmination. Guards, loyal to the true pharaoh, poured into the chamber, their battle cries echoing off gilded columns that had witnessed centuries of royal ceremonies. Prince Khaemwaset the Younger stood beside the golden throne, his face twisting with rage as he realized his carefully laid plans were crumbling around him. Foreign mercenaries moved to protect him, their curved swords glinting with deadly intent. "Kill them all," the prince commanded, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Especially the pretender who dares claim royal blood." The shield of the First Dynasty proved its legendary worth as Sergeant Ketty waded into combat, its ancient bronze deflecting attacks that should have been mortal. Behind its protection, loyal guards pressed forward with the desperate courage of men fighting for more than just their own lives. Amenhotep found himself engaged in personal combat with a Nubian warrior whose skill rivaled his own. Bronze rang against bronze as they fought across the marble floor, their battle a deadly dance of thrust and parry that left no room for error. "You fight well for a palace guard," the Nubian taunted, his accent thick with foreign contempt. "But you fight for a lost cause." "I fight for the rightful queen of Egypt," Amenhotep replied, his blade finding its mark in a combination that left his opponent staggering. "That cause is never lost while loyal hearts still beat." Khaemwaset had drawn a curved dagger from her belt and moved to flank the prince, who claimed her throne. Despite her lack of formal combat training, desperation and righteousness guided her movements as she evaded his wild swings and searched for an opening. "You are nothing," Prince Khaemwaset screamed at her, spittle flying from his lips. "A pretender from the slums who thinks ancient parchment makes her royal." "I am your Pharaoh's daughter," she replied, with calm dignity that cut deeper than any blade, "and I have come home." The shield of the First Dynasty caught the morning light streaming through the throne room's high windows, its bronze surface gleaming like captured sunlight as the battle raged around its legendary protection. The pharaoh's ceremonial sword had not been drawn in anger for 30 years, its golden blade inscribed with hieroglyphs that proclaimed divine authority over the two lands. Pharaoh Ramesses himself wielded it now, having emerged from his drugged stupor through Dr. Nebamun's skilled intervention just as the throne room battle reached its crescendo. His appearance transformed the conflict from rebellion into divine judgment. "By the authority of Ra himself," Ramesses declared, his voice carrying the power that had commanded empires, "I reclaim my throne and acknowledge my daughter." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Foreign mercenaries who had been fighting with professional determination suddenly found themselves facing not rebels, but the legitimate pharaoh they had been hired to overthrow. Several threw down their weapons immediately, unwilling to continue a fight that had become obviously treasonous. Prince Khaemwaset the Younger staggered backward from the golden throne, his face pale with the realization that his carefully orchestrated coup had collapsed in minutes. "Uncle, you don't understand," he stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. "These people are traitors, foreign agents sent to destroy our dynasty." "The only traitor I see," Ramesses replied coldly, the ceremonial sword gleaming in his weathered hands, "is the nephew who drugged his pharaoh and invited foreign armies into the sacred palace." Khaemwaset approached her father with trembling steps, the royal birth certificate held in hands that shook with emotion rather than fear. For 23 years she had lived, believing herself an orphan, and now she stood before the man whose blood ran in her veins. "My pharaoh," she said formally, offering the document that proved her identity. "I am Khaemwaset, daughter of your beloved first wife Nefertari Nebetawi, returned to claim my birthright." Ramesses accepted the papyrus with the reverence due to such sacred proof, his eyes scanning the familiar seals and signatures that he remembered placing there decades ago. As he read, his expression shifted from recognition to wonder, to profound emotion that made his hands tremble. "My daughter," he whispered, the words carrying 23 years of grief and hope. "The child I thought lost forever to political necessity and royal protection." The ceremonial sword in his other hand seemed to pulse with divine approval as he raised it in formal acknowledgement. "Let all present witness that I, Ramesses, beloved of Red and Pharaoh of the two lands, acknowledge Khaemwaset as my legitimate daughter and heir to the throne of Egypt." The remaining mercenaries laid down their weapons in the face of such overwhelming legitimacy. Even men paid to fight recognized when a cause became hopeless, and continuing to oppose a pharaoh's direct declaration would mean certain death. Prince Khaemwaset, the Younger, made one final desperate attempt to salvage his conspiracy. Drawing a curved dagger from beneath his robes, he lunged toward Khaemwaset with the wild fury of a man who had lost everything. "If I cannot rule," he snarled, "then no one will." Amenhotep moved to intercept the attack, but Pharaoh Ramesses was faster. The ceremonial sword swept in a golden arc that ended the prince's threat permanently, its ancient blade proving that divine authority carried deadly consequences for those who challenged it. "Let this be a lesson," Ramesses declared, his voice echoing through the suddenly silent throne room, to any who would raise their hand against the rightful succession of pharaohs. High Priest Khemti entered the throne room at that moment, having heard the sounds of battle and come to offer whatever assistance the gods might require. His eyes took in the scene, the pharaoh restored to consciousness and command, the rightful heir acknowledged before witnesses, and the traitorous prince lying still beside the golden throne. "The gods have spoken through mortal action," he intoned solemnly. "Divine order has been restored to the two lands." Dr. Nebamun moved among the wounded with professional efficiency, treating injuries on both sides of the conflict with the impartial dedication of his medical oath. The battle had been brief but brutal, leaving 13 dead and twice that number wounded. But the kingdom had been saved from foreign conquest. Princess Nefertari embraced her newly acknowledged niece with tears of joy and relief. "Welcome home, cousin. Your mother would be proud to see you standing where you belong." Sergeant Ketty lowered the shield of the First Dynasty, its bronze surface now bearing fresh dents that would become part of its legendary history. "Another victory for Egypt," he said simply, his scarred face showing satisfaction at duty properly done. As the immediate crisis ended, Pharaoh Ramesses turned to Amenhotep with measuring eyes. "You are the guard who protected my daughter and fought to restore legitimate rule." "I am, my Pharaoh," Amenhotep replied, bowing formally, while still gripping the commander's staff that had led their forces to victory. "And more than that," Khaemwaset added, stepping closer to her husband with pride and love shining in her eyes. "He is my husband, chosen by the gods and blessed by legitimate ceremony." The ceremonial sword caught the light from the throne room's high windows as Ramesses considered this revelation. Marriage between a pharaoh's daughter and a common guard violated every tradition of royal protocol, yet the man had risked everything to restore rightful rule. "Then he shall be prince," Ramesses decided, the divine authority in his voice making it unquestionable law. "Let love that preserves kingdoms be honored, above bloodlines that threaten them." The crown of Upper and Lower Egypt had not been worn by anyone but a reigning pharaoh for over 2 centuries. Its golden double crown representing the unified kingdoms that formed the heart of the ancient world's greatest civilization. As High Priest Khemti placed it reverently upon Khaemwaset's head in the sacred coronation ceremony, its weight seemed to carry not just precious metals, but the accumulated wisdom and responsibility of all who had worn it before. "By the blessing of Amun-Ra, King of Gods," Khemti intoned in the formal language of royal investiture, "and by the will of Pharaoh Ramesses, beloved of the gods, I crown you Khaemwaset, Princess Royal, and heir to the throne of the 2 lands." The great hall of the palace had been transformed for the ceremony, its walls draped with cloth of gold and its floors strewn with lotus petals that released sweet fragrance with each footstep. Representatives from every province of Egypt had gathered to witness the restoration of legitimate succession, their faces reflecting wonder at the dramatic events that had brought a lost princess home to claim her birthright. Amenhotep stood beside the throne in the golden robes of a royal prince, still adjusting to the reality that Pharaoh Ramesses had elevated him from common guard to member of the royal family. The transformation felt surreal, as if he were living someone else's dreams, while his own warrior's instincts remained alert for threats that might still emerge. "The kingdom rejoices in the return of its lost daughter," Pharaoh Ramesses declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. "Let all who serve the throne know that divine providence has restored what was taken, and justice has triumphed over treachery." Queen Nefertari Merenmut, the pharaoh's second wife, watched the ceremony with carefully controlled expression. Her own children's claims to succession had been superseded by Khaemwaset's legitimate right, but she had chosen graceful acceptance over futile resistance. Political wisdom dictated supporting the new order rather than risking the fate of those who had opposed it. Dr. Nebamun had spent the week following the throne room battle, treating wounded soldiers and investigating the full extent of the conspiracy that had nearly toppled the kingdom. This medical expertise had saved lives on both sides of the conflict, earning him gratitude from former enemies who now served the restored order. "The final count of conspirators stands at 47, he reported to Princess Nefertari during a private moment between ceremonial events. "Foreign agents, corrupted officials, and ambitious nobles who thought they could profit from chaos. All either dead, imprisoned, or fled beyond Egypt's borders." The coronation continued with ancient rituals that connected the present moment to thousands of years of unbroken tradition. Khaemwaset received the sacred crook and flail, symbols of royal authority that pharaohs had carried since the earliest dynasties. Each ritual gesture bound her more firmly to responsibilities she was still learning to understand. "The stairway feels heavier than I expected," she murmured to Amenhotep during a brief pause in the ceremonies. "Wait, "That comes with purpose is easier to bear than emptiness," he replied, his hand briefly touching hers in a gesture of support that did not go unnoticed by the assembled nobles. The celebration feast that followed the coronation revealed how completely the political landscape had shifted. Former enemies now sought favor with gracious humility, while longtime allies basked in the vindication of their loyalty. Palace servants who had risked their lives carrying messages through hidden passages found themselves rewarded with positions of honor and trust. Sergeant Ketty, now Captain Ketty in recognition of his service, raised his cup in toast to the royal couple. To Princess Khaemwaset and Prince Amenhotep, who proved that courage and love can overcome any conspiracy. The assembled nobles echoed the toast with enthusiasm that seemed genuine rather than merely diplomatic. The dramatic nature of the recent events had captured imaginations throughout the kingdom, creating a story that would be told for generations. High Priest Khaemwaset approached the royal dais carrying a scroll inscribed with formal declarations. "Messages have arrived from governors throughout the kingdom," he announced. All provinces acknowledge the legitimacy of Princess Khaemwaset's claim and pledge continued loyalty to Pharaoh Ramesses and his designated heir. The crown's weight had indeed become more comfortable as the day progressed, as if it was settling into its proper place after too many years in storage. Khaemwaset found herself naturally adopting the bearing and speech patterns appropriate to her station, drawing on reserves of dignity she hadn't known she possessed. "The gods have been generous in their restoration of divine order," she addressed the gathering with growing confidence. "But our work is not finished. A kingdom nearly torn apart by treachery must be healed through justice, mercy, and renewed dedication to the welfare of all our people." As evening approached and the formal ceremonies concluded, Pharaoh Ramesses called for private audience with his newly acknowledged daughter and her husband. In the intimate setting of his personal chambers, the divine pharaoh revealed himself as simply a father, reunited with lost family. "I have no sons," he said quietly, the weight of succession heavy in his words. "The crown that sits upon your head today will someday rest there permanently. Are you prepared for such responsibility?" Khaemwaset looked at the golden double crown, where it now rested on a specially crafted stand, its precious metals gleaming in the lamplight. "I am learning, my father. With wisdom from advisors I trust and strength from love that sustains me." The crown of Upper and Lower Egypt seemed to pulse with approval, as if acknowledging that it had finally found its way to worthy hands. The peace treaty scroll lay unfurled across the cedar table in Pharaoh Ramesses' private council chamber, its papyrus surface covered with hieroglyphs that would reshape diplomatic relations throughout the known world. The document bore seals from Nubian kings, Assyrian princes, and even distant kingdoms beyond the Great Desert, all acknowledging Egypt's restored stability and requesting renewed trade agreements. "The conspiracy's collapse has had consequences far beyond our borders," Princess Nefertari explained as she guided Khaemwaset through the complex diplomatic correspondence. "Foreign powers who had hoped to exploit our internal division now scramble to maintain favorable relations with the legitimate government." Khaemwaset studied the documents with growing understanding of how interconnected the ancient world truly was. Every decision made in the palace of Memphis sent ripples across trade routes that stretched from the Nile's source to the shores of distant seas. "The Nubian ambassador who met secretly with our enemies now requests formal audience to renegotiate mining rights," she observed, noting the irony in the hastily composed diplomatic message. "Fear motivates more honest communication than friendship ever did." Amenhotep stood near the window overlooking the palace gardens, where construction crews worked to repair damage from the recent fighting. His elevation to princely rank had brought responsibilities he was still learning to navigate, but his warrior's instincts remained valuable in assessing the loyalty of visiting dignitaries. "The Assyrian delegation includes 2 men I recognize from intelligence reports," he noted. "Former mercenary commanders who likely provided some of the foreign soldiers that supported Prince Khaemwaset's rebellion, which makes their current mission particularly interesting," Nebamun observed from his position near a side table where he was reviewing medical reports from provinces throughout the kingdom. Nothing motivates diplomatic creativity like the fear of being held accountable for past treachery. Pharaoh Ramesses himself reviewed the most important treaty proposals, his experienced eyes catching subtleties that younger readers might miss. Despite his recent ordeal with drugged captivity, he had recovered his full mental faculties and political acumen. The Phoenician cities offer increased tribute in exchange for guaranteed protection of their shipping routes, he noted with satisfaction. Our demonstration of internal strength has convinced them that Egypt remains the dominant power in this region. High Priest Khaemwaset entered the chamber carrying additional scrolls that had arrived with the morning's diplomatic pouch. The situation continues to evolve favorably, he reported. 3 kingdoms that had been withholding tribute during our recent troubles have now sent full payments along with apologies for administrative delays. The restoration of order had indeed sent powerful messages to Egypt's neighbors and trading partners. The swift collapse of the conspiracy and the dramatic return of legitimate succession had demonstrated the kingdom's fundamental stability despite temporary disruption. What troubles me, Khaemwaset said thoughtfully, is how quickly these same kingdoms might turn against us again if we showed signs of weakness. Their loyalty seems motivated more by fear than friendship. Such is the nature of international relations, Princess Nefertari replied with the wisdom of long experience in royal diplomacy. But fear-based loyalty can be more reliable than emotion-based alliance, provided we maintain the strength that motivates their caution. Amenhotep approached the table to examine one particular treaty that had caught his attention. The Hittite embassy includes provisions for military cooperation against mutual threats, he observed. That suggests they're as concerned about the foreign mercenaries who escaped our justice as we are. The implications were significant. Professional soldiers who had fled Egypt after the conspiracy's collapse would seek employment elsewhere, potentially destabilizing other kingdoms with their skills and knowledge of recent events. Nebamun, Pharaoh Ramesses addressed the physician directly. Your investigation into the conspiracy revealed foreign connections that extend far beyond simple mercenary employment. What insights can you share about continuing threats? The doctor consulted his notes with characteristic thoroughness. The poisoning techniques used against palace servants required knowledge that could only come from kingdoms where such methods are traditional. The Persians and certain Mesopotamian cities have long histories of assassination by exotic compounds, meaning the threat may resurface in different forms even though the immediate conspiracy has been crushed, Khaemwaset concluded. Exactly. Which is why these peace treaties represent more than diplomatic courtesy, her father replied. They're intelligence-gathering opportunities and early warning systems for future threats. As the day progressed, additional treaties arrived with encouraging frequency. Word of Egypt's restored stability was spreading rapidly throughout the ancient world, carried by merchants and diplomats who had witnessed the dramatic events firsthand. The most encouraging development, Princess Nefertari noted as she reviewed the latest correspondence, is that several kingdoms are requesting formal marriage alliances with Egyptian nobility. Such proposals indicate they view our dynasty as stable enough for long-term planning. The peace treaty scroll at the center of their discussions represented more than diplomatic success. It symbolized Egypt's emergence from crisis stronger and more unified than before. The conspiracy that had threatened to tear the kingdom apart had ultimately demonstrated its resilience and the loyalty of its people. We should celebrate these achievements, Khaemwaset decided, but not so enthusiastically that we forget the vigilance that made them possible. The afternoon sun slanted through the chamber's windows, illuminating the peace treaty scroll with golden light that seemed to bless the diplomatic triumph it represented. The blessing oils gleamed like liquid gold in their alabaster vessels, each precious substance crafted from flowers, spices, and sacred resins that had been blessed in temples throughout the kingdom. Tomorrow's coronation ceremony would transform Princess Khaemwaset from acknowledged heir into Pharaoh-elect, a title that carried divine mandate alongside earthly authority. High Priest Khaemwaset supervised the preparation of these sacred unguents with meticulous care, understanding that every detail of the ritual connected mortal rulers to the eternal power of the gods. The myrrh oil comes from trees blessed by the priests of Re, he explained to Khaemwaset as she observed the ceremonial preparations. The frankincense was burned in the temple of Ammon for 7 days and 7 nights. Each element carries prayers and divine approval that will manifest during tomorrow's anointing. 6 months had passed since the dramatic restoration of legitimate rule, and the kingdom had flourished under the stability that came with undisputed succession. Trade routes buzzed with activity, provincial governors reported unprecedented prosperity, and foreign kingdoms continued sending diplomatic missions seeking favorable agreements. Khaemwaset had grown into her role with natural grace that surprised even her closest advisor. The nervous woman who had once drawn water from the Nile now commanded meetings with provincial governors and resolved disputes that had puzzled seasoned administrators. Her father watched her development with pride that mixed paternal affection with royal satisfaction. "You have the gift of listening before speaking," Pharaoh Ramesses observed during one of their regular private consultations. "Many rulers, including myself in younger years, prefer the sound of their own voices to the wisdom they might gain from others." Amenhotep had similarly adapted to princely responsibilities, though his warrior instincts remained sharp despite months of peaceful governance. He had established new security protocols that balanced necessary vigilance with the openness required for effective diplomacy. "The royal guard reports no significant threats," he told his wife as they reviewed the day's intelligence reports. "But I maintain rotating patrols through the hidden passages we discovered during the crisis. Some lessons should never be forgotten." Nebuchadnezzar had been appointed chief royal physician, his heroic service during the conspiracy earning him unprecedented access to the royal family and their most sensitive medical needs. His investigation into the poisoning attempts had resulted in improved protocols for food preparation and water purification throughout the palace. "Your health remains excellent," he assured Khaemwaset during her regular examination, "though I detect changes that suggest you should reduce your official duties somewhat over the coming months." The implications of his gentle recommendation brought tears of joy to her eyes. After months of wondering whether the stress of recent events might have affected her ability to bear children, she now carried confirmation that the royal lineage would continue. Princess Nefertari had become her closest advisor and confidant, sharing decades of experience in navigating the complexities of court life. Their friendship had deepened beyond political alliance into genuine familial affection. "Motherhood will change your perspective on many things," Nefertari counseled during a quiet moment in the palace gardens. "The kingdom becomes not just your responsibility, but your child's inheritance. That knowledge makes every decision carry additional weight." The blessing oils required final consecration in the temple of Pa, where Khaemwaset would spend the night in prayer and meditation before her formal elevation. The ritual demanded solitude and spiritual preparation that would connect her consciousness to the divine mandate she was about to receive. "The oils will be applied at specific points on your body," High Priest Khemti instructed, each location corresponding to attributes required for righteous rule. Wisdom for the forehead, compassion for the heart, strength for the hands that will wield royal authority. As evening approached, Khaemwaset made her way through the palace corridors one last time, as merely heir rather than ruler. Servants bowed with respect that had evolved from fearful deference to genuine affection. Her reign, she realized, had already begun in the hearts of those who served the royal household. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" Amenhotep asked as they reached the temple entrance where they would be separated until the coronation ceremony concluded. "As ready as anyone can be for transformation into something they've never been before," she replied honestly. "But I have good advisors, loyal subjects, and a husband whose love gives me strength to face any challenge." The blessing oils awaited her within the sacred chamber, their surfaces reflecting candlelight like miniature suns. Each precious substance represented prayers from throughout the kingdom, hopes invested in her ability to rule with wisdom and justice. "The people believe in you," Amenhotep said softly, his final words before the ritual separation began. "But more importantly, you believe in the responsibility you're accepting. That makes all the difference between ruling and merely wearing a crown." The temple doors closed behind her as she entered the sacred space where pharaohs had prepared for coronation for countless generations. The blessing oils would soon transform her from princess to queen, from heir to ruler, from mortal woman to divine representative of eternal Egypt. The royal scepter of eternal rule had been passed down through 43 pharaohs, its golden length inscribed with the names of every ruler who had wielded its divine authority. As Queen Khaemwaset held it for the first time as crowned pharaoh, she felt the weight of all those who had come before her and the responsibility to all who would come after. 1 year had passed since her coronation, and the kingdom flourished under her guidance, with prosperity that exceeded even the most optimistic predictions. The morning sun painted the palace gardens in shades of gold and green, as she walked the same paths where she had once struggled to understand court politics. Now she moved with the natural authority of someone born to command, her steps sure and her presence commanding respect without effort. The harvest reports exceed all expectations, announced Vizier Amenhotep, the elderly administrator who had served 3 pharaohs with unwavering competence. The Nile's flood was perfectly timed, the weather has been ideal, and your agricultural reforms have increased productivity throughout the kingdom. Amenhotep walked beside his wife, no longer the uncertain guard captain who had first spoken to her at the river's edge. 18 months of ruling as royal consort had refined his natural leadership abilities, and he had become her most trusted advisor on matters ranging from military strategy to judicial reform. The provincial governors report complete loyalty and cooperation, he added with satisfaction. No signs of unrest, no complaints about taxation levels, and voluntary tribute from territories that had previously required military encouragement. Their son Rameses Amenhotep slept peacefully in the arms of his nurse, the 3-month-old prince already showing signs of the intelligence and composure that marked royal bloodlines. His birth had been celebrated throughout the kingdom, with festivals that lasted for days, marking not just the continuation of the dynasty, but the hope for sustained prosperity under enlightened rule. Nebamun approached with the daily reports that had become routine during his tenure as chief royal physician. Both mother and child remain in excellent health, he announced with professional satisfaction. The Queen's recovery from childbirth has been remarkable, and the prince shows every sign of robust development. They paused beside the reflecting pool where lotus blossoms floated like small suns on the dark water. This same garden had once felt like a prison to Khaemwaset when she was learning to navigate court life. Now it represented the peace and beauty that proper governance could create. Sometimes I think about that morning at the Nile, she said quietly to Amenhotep, adjusting the golden scepter that had become as familiar as the ivory comb he had given her so long ago. If you hadn't spoken to me, if you hadn't seen something worth protecting in a poor woman drawing water, the gods had already chosen you, he replied with conviction. I was simply fortunate enough to recognize destiny when it appeared before me. Princess Nefertari joined them from the palace, carrying scrolls that bore news from throughout the known world. Her role as chief diplomatic advisor had proven invaluable, and foreign kingdoms competed for her attention, knowing that her recommendations carried significant weight with the royal couple. The Phoenician cities request permission to establish a permanent embassy in Memphis, she repeated with obvious pleasure. 3 Mesopotamian kingdoms have offered marriage alliances for when Prince Ramesses Amenhotep comes of age. The Nubians have increased their tribute payments without being asked. High Priest Khaemwaset approached with his characteristic measured pace, carrying reports from temples throughout the kingdom that confirmed the spiritual prosperity accompanying material success. The gods continue to smile upon your reign, he announced. Priests report that offerings have increased voluntarily, temple attendance has grown, and the people genuinely believe they are blessed by divine favor. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen across the garden, Khaemwaset found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her from obscurity to supreme power. The royal scepter in her hands had guided the kingdom through challenges that would have destroyed lesser rulers, but more importantly, it had been wielded with wisdom earned through hardship and strengthened by love. What do you see when you look toward the future? Amenhotep asked, following her gaze toward the Nile that sparkled in the distance. A kingdom at peace, a son who will inherit stability rather than chaos, and the satisfaction of knowing we've honored the trust placed in us, she replied. But mostly I see the continuation of something that began with a conversation between strangers who recognized each other's souls. The royal scepter caught the late afternoon light as she raised it toward the river where their story had begun. In its golden surface, she could almost see the reflection of that young woman who had knelt to draw water, never imagining that destiny waited in the shadows of a date palm. "Come," she said to her husband, her voice carrying the contentment of dreams fulfilled and responsibilities met. "Let's walk down to the Nile. I'd like our son to see where his parents first met, where love conquered impossible odds, and where a kingdom was saved by two people who dared to believe in each other." The royal scepter of eternal rule would guide many future pharaohs, but none would wield it with greater satisfaction than the woman who had traveled from poverty to power on the strength of courage, wisdom, and love that had proved stronger than any earthly conspiracy.